Yay, the hangout. At exactly 10 a.m. it clicked over.
Incredible.
So, hello, anybody that may be watching this. But we're recording this for YouTube as well. And Connor, how do we go to the YouTube page that had the questions already on? Oh, here you go. Here's one from Brian. Oh, and John, they're coming in fast. Where's the questions coming up? Excuse me, we're sort of new to this, so give us a second, because I see prompts coming up on the page. Opening Q&A. Hey, thank you, Connor.
Pick the one that you want to answer, and then
okay,
that way everyone knows what they're.
Okay, great. So, okay. Oh, I see. We've got loads. Oh, look at that, Shelly. We're worried. Will there be any questions? We have 33 viewers and loads of questions. Hello, this is the great Shelly Yakus. Introduce yourself.
Hi. What he said. No. I'm going to take him everywhere.
Great, good. Yeah. Well, I love Shelly, and I love that you guys are hitting us for questions. So let's, here's some popular ones here. Let's go. We've got a lot to go through. So, oh, wow. How did you get started in the world of music, from Fred Gomez?
Well, my dad had a studio in Boston, so I grew when I was a little kid. He had this studio, and for many years, for about 30 years, he had the studio in Boston. And I used to go in on weekends with him and summer vacations, and it was great. I loved being there, and I really learned how to hear. That's where I learned how to hear, was in that studio. And I learned really the basics of how it all works. And then I went on from there, still a young buck, went on to New York to A&R recording in the late 60s. And then it all started from there.
Now, your dad, one second, your dad wrote quite a famous song.
Yes, he was a co-writer on Old Cape Cod.
Yeah. Which if you do a Wikipedia on, says, and I looked this up the other day, people in Cape Cod said it put Cape Cod on the map.
Actually, in some strange way, that's true. He got an award from the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce for the person who did the most that year for Cape Cod.
Wow, that's
so
great.
For some reason, that song attracted enormous amounts of people, tourists, people on vacation, just people from surrounding areas to come to Cape Cod. It was a beautiful song.
It was wonderful.
And it was brought to him by a woman who brought him a poem and said, "Can you put this to music?" And I remember him telling me, "Well, you know, there's really something here. And if we wrote a chorus, maybe I could write a chorus for the song, for this, and make it into a song."
That's
and then
fantastic.
we put some music to it. And then one thing led to another. So
that's wonderful.
Very successful. Next
question here, it's a popular one, says, with so much mixing in the box talk, hybrid workflow solutions, but at 44 or 48, Andrew Sheps is mixing on his laptop with plugins at 96K, question mark. Do you submit to mastering at 44 or 48? I think, if I can read between the lines, I think the question is what quality do you submit to mastering?
Well, here's the thing. We're all trying to get to a destination.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what each of us as individuals feel is our best work and best work for the client. And there are many roads you can take to San Francisco or to New York City, but you end up there no matter what road you take. So everyone has a personal preference, whether it's 96, whether it's 48. I personally, my own belief is that sometimes you have to end up at 44.1. Converting anything else to 44.1, you lose your gain sometimes.
Oh, you do?
I think so.
Right.
There's always a difference in that conversion if you listen to the before and after. I'm not going to say you lose all your gains, but to me, you lose something that you started with. And then there's this theory, okay, the cover on Vogue magazine, the original photograph is usually like outstanding. Well, it always is outstanding. And then when they print and make a generation from there, it's less, even though that cover always looks amazing. So there's that theory that you got to start with more, because it's when you do the conversion or the copy or whatever it is, you end up with a little less. For me personally, I like working at 44:1, because then I make it sound right to me. I know to myself, to my client, I don't have to do a conversion and be concerned that something is going to change in there that's going to bother me. So that's what I do.
Fantastic. Thanks for the answer. Next one. Oh, hi there. Hi, Rudra. Okay. Related, given there are a lot of artists today that are working on a closed loop, few or by themselves, do you think one can develop the other person presence in themselves? How, if not, how would you recommend an artist to get that kind of feedback in the surroundings? Okay, I think what they're asking, you probably understand clearly. Well, what they're asking is, like, most people these days, because of this technology that we have, laptops and stuff, are working in isolation, where before, because you can plug in a USB keyboard and start programming drums, where before, when you and I were kids, we had to find a drummer.
Yes.
So I suppose they're asking what would be your opinion on how to create that?
You read the question one more time.
It says, related, a lot of artists today are working in a closed loop, i.e. few or by themselves. Do you think you can still develop that other person presence by themselves? If not, how would you recommend an artist get that feedback in their surroundings?
Because they're working in isolation.
Yeah, they're working in isolation. How do they get better? How do they develop? Because when you were on the interview we did, you talked about, you go into a studio, you're surrounded by these incredible musicians and other engineers and producers, and you.
Right, I understand.
Basically, can you solve the question, the answer of life, the universe, and everything?
Yes.
That's a big question.
Of course. I've seen this done in different ways. I'll throw out a few ways I've seen it done.
Great.
Even working with the best, most talented producers I've worked with, they play what they're working on for people they trust in private. And usually it's somebody who's not a yes person. They're going to say, oh, here's my opinion. Now, that opinion it's still an opinion. It may be wrong. It may lead you in the wrong direction. But people, I think people who are producing or creating should be surrounded by people that give them honest answers about music. And most people are pretty brutal about answering. They seem to be very truthful about music, and say no, I don't like it, or yes, it's terrific, and really and genuinely mean it. But I think to be more direct, this is a tough one, because it's all about perspective. How do you keep your perspective and know whether you have something good or not?
Right.
And how do you know you should keep working on it, or are you done with it? Does it need less? Does it need more? It's a great question. I think for the people who are unsigned, I think you need to play it in a different environment than where you're creating. Take it out into your car. Take it out over to a friend's house. Hear in a different environment, almost through their ears. Because suddenly, taking it out of your studio at home or wherever you're working, you suddenly have this awareness of whether what you're doing is working or not. And I'm always surprised and a little shocked that people who are out there creating, people who are unsigned, that are creating, are not able to hear what's wrong with their own stuff, even when they play it, even when I suggest to them, play it against your favorite song, or with your favorite 5 songs. Listen to those arrangements, because a lot of the success of records has to do with the arrangement. I mean, obviously you need a good melody, a really strong melody, some good words, and a presentation, but arrangement is a huge part of this. And it's not talked about a lot, but if you listen to the successful records, they all have an arrangement that goes by and you don't even notice it's been arranged. And I think that you have to listen to some stuff without jerking the volume control up and down, without listening overly loud. Listen at a comfortable level, and then listen to someone else's material and try to study their song structure. talking about verse, chorus, solo, middle eight, bridge, ride out. You don't have to copy them. You just have to have the same transition, same interest level, same whatever. And keep in mind, people are like input junkies. They need something to change every 7 seconds. So try to do something. Try to do something that piques their interest. It's sort of like you have 3.5 minutes to tell a story, and as a creator or a mixer, you have the same 3.5 minutes to capture the mastering or whatever it might be, and not lose it. So it's kind of like a novel in 3.5 minutes. Did you tell the story without drifting away?
That's fantastic. Great answer. I like that every 7 seconds. I'm going to take that to heart.
Okay.
Here's David Case, and he says, what would you consider the most critical skill to have a producer who doesn't know music theory or doesn't play instruments, but understands and feels the proper musical ideas when these occur? Oh, it's not from David Case, it says from George. Okay, so I think outside, I suppose he's saying as a traditional engineer, if you weren't a musician and you didn't understand music theory and stuff, where would you want to increase your skill level?
For example, am I a musician? No, I'm not a musician.
So you're the perfect person to answer this question?
Yeah, because for me personally, I feel that some of that training, and I don't want to be misunderstood here because I'm going to get a lot of people angry if I am, but education is really important about what we're talking about. But I'm not held back by the same things that other people are held back by in creating records, where they have to have the pitch perfect and they have to have the feel exactly on like this.
Sure.
And that kind of training to me makes a different kind of record, but not the kind of record I want to make. I avoid that because you could make a perfect record, but I think a perfect record is boring.
No, I agree.
Perfect record is boring. A great record is exciting. And a great record has, we call it a hurricane mix. Stuff is moving around. Sometimes a rough mix is a much better mix than a final mix because you don't think about it too much. You're not getting everything exactly in the right place is boring. And so, my point is that sometimes, okay, let me say it this way. Having an education and being really knowledgeable about all the things in your question, it only works if you do the right thing with that stuff when you apply it to music. If you don't, music gets stiff. It gets, you're working with people and you're sucking the life out of the room because you're being a little unreasonable about your expectations. Mm-hmm. And it's good to have an overview and as much knowledge as you can, but you also have to know how to apply that knowledge. And for me personally, I call it MTV pitch. If the pitch is a little, if I'm doing a rock and roll record and the pitch is a little not perfect, but you'd hear it on MTV, I like that. And I think it adds character to it. I don't think it has to be perfect. It's nice when it is, but you have to have some movement. You have to have some movement in the time, the pitch a little bit, as long as it's not sour.
I love that. And I think that's great because there's so many people that, as listeners, we love music. So if somebody loves music, is passionate about it, and wants to become a producer and an engineer, sure, they don't have to feel like, and I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have a closer consumer ear than a guy that's just sitting there nitpicking, like, oh, but the minor third should this, that, the other.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, what you and I do in music, Arnold Salesman calls you to produce an album, or someone calls me to mix an album. We're on a list with other people, and they're saying, all right, Warren is the guy to produce this. Shelly is the guy to mix this. They're choosing us over other people on a good-sized list they have. And really what they're saying, without thinking it through at the labels, is which one of these guys on this list can get my artist's music across to the listener better than another guy?
Wow.
That's what I think is going on there. I mean,
Definitely
we're
is
just
the best
trying to
stuff.
get the emotion across to the listener. How do you do that? And I think in that description, it's how it's done. The rules are there are no rules.
I like that.
Yes.
Rules are there. I like that one a lot. So what's your approach to recording a band? Do you record a band in a room together? Your players?
Both. But I might do the tracking session with everyone live. And if I can avoid using headsets for most of the guys, and maybe one guy has to wear a headset because he needs to hear a little bit of and I want the vocalist, I want the singer to sing live, even if it's just going to be a rough vocal. It brings the band alive. So I'm a big believer in recording as many people live as I can. And if anything has to be redone later, it's easier to hear what you're deleting and replacing, and does it keep that same live feel, or are you losing it? Are we making this record better, or are we making it worse with these changes? Because you have something to compare it to. There's nothing like a live band playing. And then you have to do some overdubs. I'm not talking about being a purist. I'm just trying to capture that feel that
Sure.
the band has. And there's a lot of different ways to do it.
I love that weather. That makes perfect sense to me. Here's another popular question. The kick and snare and guitar sound on Damn the Torpedoes. What was the pickup? What was the pickup then and now? Maybe I'm not reading the full question. What was the pickup? Truly amazing then and now.
They're asking about snare drum, bass drum sounds.
Yeah.
So,
and guitar sound. So the kick
Oh.
and snare on Damn the Torpedoes.
well, the first day of the recording of Damn the Torpedoes, Stan Lynch. Now Stan's a tall guy. He's a manly man, and he walks in with this drum set that's little and has very little sound. I said, Stan, it's like sounds like a pink set of drums. What are we going to do with it? So the next day, we both went to his favorite music store, and we picked out some drums and some heads, and we mixed and matched and came up with something that really that made a sound in the studio. And that's really one of the key things. Is it all starts in the studio. You know, sure, you can use samples in the control room and all that. We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the live recording of those drums. And I had to use a mic on the bass drum that I had never used before, because the shell of the bass drum was so live that nothing, even with a pillow in there, nothing would tame this thing except a mic that was actually dead sounding.
What mic did you use?
441.
Oh,
it's a very dry, it's a great mic. It can take a hit. It can take the sound of a gunshot. And it's very dry sounding and I never realized how directional that mic is. So because it's what I call dry sounding, it got rid of, or helped me get rid of, that kind of echo and bounce inside that bass drum, and gave me a very direct bass drum sound. I'm sure I usually use 2 or 3 mics on a bass drum. Sometimes add a 57, sometimes a 47 FET at a few feet away, and mix and match. They all pick up different things. No matter what those little slips of paper look like that come with the microphone that shows this perfectly flat response, they have personalities like people. And if you were to listen to 3 different mics on a bass drum, you would have 3 different personalities of that bass drum. And I try to mix them together in a proportion that makes one bass drum sound. And so as far as the snare was concerned, a lot of it was in the tuning, and Stan had the patience for us to work together to tune the snare and keep it in tune. And we came up with we used a 40-strand strainer on the bottom instead of a 20-strand. 20-strand.
Oh, wow, so super wide.
Yes, super wide. That way you don't have to crank it so hard to get the snare sound. The harder you crank it, the more it chokes the drum. The looser And also I like to have the snare stand not squeezing the drum because it starts. So if the snare stand is just holding the snare drum, so to speak, without squeezing the sides, and we have a 40 strand snare on the bottom, I don't have to tighten up the bottom head so much and tighten the snares so much to get that sound, because I wanted a fat sound, because that seemed to be what Tom Petty's best presentation of his songs would be in my mind, would be a fatter sound rather sound.
Right, absolutely.
And so to get that sound and get the crack at the same time is not easy. So you have to find a drum that has that personality, so to speak, like a Black Beauty, or once in a while you can find a wooden drum that will do it, but that's hard to do.
Was it a Black Beauty?
Yeah, I actually I don't remember, but I know that in that day I really tried to use them, or it was a 6.5-inch chrome Ludwig.
The Superphonic?
I don't know what they called it, but it was the 6.5. They were always 6.5-inch. They were deep, and then we would fool with the head tuning and stuff like that. And in that day, in the 70s, Ludwig made a drum that they really sounded good.
Yeah.
And of course,
probably a Superphonic, because I think there was that, Acrolites, and of course Black Beauties.
So I would always just say, you got a 6.5-inch Ludwig.
Right.
It may have had that name. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so having the drum relaxed and his arm tight, and you're not jacking the head up to make that sound you're looking for. And then you got to record it. And sometimes it takes a couple of mics to record it and do different things to those two mics.
What mics did you use?
57s. And I use 57 underneath and that mic is always going to be out of phase because it's facing the other mic, unless the phase is wrong from the factory. But you have to figure it out. Just flip it so that it's full sounding, and just used a little bit of it to, because the mics on top are this far away, and that's pretty close. Most instruments don't sound like the instruments until they're this far away. Well, when you have a snare drum, microphone, on a snare drum that close, you're not going to get much of the bottom. And you need a little, for what I go for, I need a little bit.
Great.
So that's pretty much.
And then the last part of his question was the guitar sound.
Well, Mike Campbell has a great guitar sound, and the whole and in some ways it makes it harder to record it because you're expected to capture that. I expect myself to capture that. He expects me to.
Amazing guitar player.
Yeah, and he's already worked out his sounds and stuff. So to capture it in the studio, I would use, on one amp, I would use 2 or 3 mics, and a lot of times I would use a mic on each speaker and go to 2 channels, and then a mic very close to the cloth on the speaker, and and split that between those 2 channels. So the low end would come forward. So when the guitar is in the track, you're going to hear some low end, because as you know, you put the guitar on the track, and the first thing that disappears is the low end. It's eaten up by other instruments, and you're left with the mid-range and the top, and you're struggling to not have it interfere with the voice. So by adding a mic on the low end, or making it the low end for the guitar, even though the tones coming out of the guitar are not really low, this makes it sort of simulate that it's low. EQ it, limit it just a little bit, and place it across the 2, the left and right, and you get some movement, because if it's only one guitar, you don't want it to be on one side. It becomes this little thing. So in the mix, you have a choice. You can make one channel all the way to the right, the other channel in the middle, and now you have the spread of the guitar all the way on one side, or left center, right center of the entire vocal. There's so many things you can do with it. You can put reverb or delay on one channel of the guitar in the mix, and not on the other. There's so many choices, and it's so creative doing it like that. Also, sometimes I didn't use that center mic. I just use 2 mics and a 3rd mic further back. And if I didn't have the tracks, because we were using tape in that day, I would combine all the mics into a sound. And one of the tricks for everything I'm talking about, no matter what the question is, I try to listen you have to listen a little by itself, but I try to listen with everybody else playing at some point. When we get all the sounds sort of roughed out, I'll listen to everybody playing together. I'll go out in the room and hear what they sound like. Because if you don't go out in the room and listen, you're twisting EQ to make it sound like what you think it should sound like. And a lot of times it's just there already, and you have to do just minimal stuff to capture it. So that's pretty much.
I love that. I've not tried that left, right, and center. I'm going to now.
It works.
Loads of questions. Would love to hear about. Oh, there you go. Says would love to hear about the recording of Down the Torpedoes in detail, about Sound City and how they got that sound. I think we touched on a lot of it, but do you want to just finish up on Down the Torpedoes?
Yeah. Well, one of the things about Sound City that really influenced the final sound of the album was that in that control room, the speakers were very, very close to us and gigantic, the size of Volkswagens. So
that's big.
So I thought we had this really big drum sound. And when we took it to Cherokee, we mixed it on an A range, which is a great sounding console. Recorded on an Eve, mixed on an A range.
The Trident.
Yes.
Beautiful console.
And so all of a sudden I put the tracks up, and there's this snare drum that's like much smaller than I expected, because everything was built around it, all the overdubs. When you're in the room and you're overdubbing, you can't make an overdub sound better than the snare, or worse than the snare, or better than the drum sound, or worse than the drum sound. Everybody has to sound like they came in the same car to the session together. So you're matching everything. And suddenly I'm in another studio where everything matches except the snare drum doesn't work. It sounds like that guy came in a different car to the session than the rest of the musicians.
So what did you do?
On that A range, you're able to boost. I had to boost a lot of low end to get it, and fool around with limiting an EQ and stuff like that, and also a lot of the size. I was saying the size of an instrument is not really the size until you get further away. Well, the overhead mics are picking up a lot of the snare drum. The tom-toms, because of the mics I use, are picking up a lot of the snare drum. It's everywhere in the set. I don't try to isolate it, because to me it gets small sounding. Other people who work like that, they're able to make it big by having everything isolated, and a lot of isolation. I'm not able to do it. I do it how I do it, and it works for me. And so on the A range, when you push up low end, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You'd be hard pressed to make something muddy. It just gets bigger and more gigantic, and suddenly it's more of what I heard. And then I started fitting it in and trying to get it to work. People think a lot of this stuff is planned. The final mixes on that album, or any album I worked on, a lot of them are from like what was best, serve the song. What was best for the song, regardless of what I wanted. What was best for the song? What did the producer and the group want? What's my own opinion of it? We kind of put it together. And some of it comes from desperation. It's like I'm sitting there. I have Jimmy Iovine in the room. He's producing. I have Tom Petty. I have the whole band there. And they're expecting to hear something really good. And I got this thing on the board that sucks. and I'm going.
Only you can say that.
Well, I'm there and I'm saying, this isn't, to myself, this isn't working. What's going to make this song work? Sometimes you have to pull everything down.
What was the first song you pulled up?
Gee, I think it might have been "Don't Do Me Like That."
Okay, so you started off with a big one.
Yeah, but it wasn't a big one at that. Everyone thought that was a 10th song on a 10-song album.
You were telling us that in the interview, yeah.
And so we approached it like a single, and we made this thing really pound away, and we all worked on it, and we came up with that, and that was a real confidence builder in terms of the direction.
After this is not about me, but quickly, after we talked about that song, I went back and listened to it, and listened to it with fresh ears, because you talked so much about it. And this is my honest opinion. What I feel like the song is unrelenting. That's why it's a hit. Right from the beginning, it's like dun 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 dun, and you just put on headphones, and it's over, and you're just like, what happened? It's like unrelenting. There's not that sort of like low kind of like, oh, and here's the big chorus comes in. It just doesn't. It just grabs you from the get-go and doesn't let go of you.
Yeah.
It's just got you, and then you're like, it makes me want to play it again immediately.
Well, that's awesome. And what you said.
But you were talking about it last time with the piano sound. You said you made it more aggressive than the way it was recorded, so it had that.
Yes, yeah. It was recorded. It was the way it was recorded was very polite, and it worked for the song. Until I started thinking about it as a single and saying, wait, this isn't going to work as a single. The song has a single melody, to me, but the sound of it doesn't sound like a single. Right. So I just, Jimmy and I talked about it. We went at it, and I made it sound like Benmont had steel hands, like he was just hitting that piano really hard, but with feel. And we found a way to do it through EQ and limiting and picking the right limiter. And
do you remember what the?
I think it was a Pi.
It was
I think it was a Pi limiter.
The holy grail of compressors.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
you can do it.
Fairchild,
yeah. You can do it with another limiter that has the same similar sound. You can probably do it with a Fairchild, maybe an LA2A. But the Pi has this thing where it gets aggressive without getting thin and annoying. And so anyway, with that sound, you can imagine everything else sounded dull and uninteresting suddenly because that piano was so aggressive now. So one of the things in mixing I find is that I have to find what is the strongest thing in the track, and then what is the next strongest thing in the track, and build around it. Because if the song isn't working, like we were saying before, if the song isn't working and I'm trying and I'm getting desperate, like what are we going to do to bring this to the finish line so that it sounds like what we'd all expect here? I find that I find that just sometimes I start playing with it in a way that I wouldn't if it was working well, and then suddenly things start to appear. And as I said before, if I pull it all down and put up the strongest instrument, whether it's the voice, sometimes I'd start with the voice and mix to it. Sometimes I'd start with one guitar and mix to it, because you have to start with what is your strongest feel. And then go to the next instrument that has, it might be the voice that has the next strongest feel. So now you got a guitar and a voice, and you're trying to now mix everything to that, and sometimes force it to fit with a crowbar. Because this thing about mixing with drums and bass first, it doesn't always work and serve the song well. When it does, it does. But I've always found that I have to find a way to make this thing great from the beginning to end.
I like that. I've heard a couple of people I respect say this exactly what we just said, that they find what's the instrument that's driving the song, mix that first, and then take it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, that's funny. Well, Bell in Don't Fear the Reaper.
I should have bronzed it or chromed it. No, it's missing. That would be worth a lot of money. I bet I could get 10 grand for that cowbell today.
Easily. You could probably sell it to Will Ferrell and make a fortune.
Yeah, right.
This is interesting. This is from John Burns, and John says, did John Lennon have any rituals or preparations before recording that stood out from others that you worked with? I imagine he was a pro as it gets, but please exclude the indulgent question. That's interesting.
Yeah, nothing that I saw.
Nothing you saw? No.
Like there are other artists before, for example, before they go on stage, that take half hour or 45 minutes in a closed room with their band, sometimes by themselves. No one knows what goes on in that room. No one knows if they're meditating, if they're what they're doing. But there are many people that are consistent in that way. As far as the studio, a lot of people work out before they go to the studio just to clear their head and all that. John, we'd meet at the studio. I never saw him go through any sort of ritual. I guess if you're John Lennon, you don't have to. You can write songs like that. You don't have to.
There's an interesting one. Hi, Shelly. Do you think a time will come when analog will become completely a thing of the past? and everything will be in the box? What do you think?
Wow.
Big question.
Boy, it's right to the point. Holy cow. I have no wiggle room. Uh, I don't think so, and here's why. There was a time when I thought digital was going to take over completely. Everything on the radio, streaming was digital, transferred from analog to digital, which changes the sound. Everything was sounding alike in terms of the digital world to me. And then suddenly the sales of vinyl records last Christmas were enormous, huge. So I think what's happening is that people, I don't know how big it's going to get, but people, human beings gravitate towards that sound of a vinyl record. Does it have to be on a vinyl record? No. If the people who design the electronics can figure out how to get that sound onto a digital format, I'm in heaven, because it's much closer. That sound that's on a vinyl record, at least on the outside grooves, which are the most accurate ones, to the original tape. I think that is more accurate to the sound on a vinyl is more accurate to what a band really sounds like. And I think that if you were to go hear a band rehearse, whether it's a garage, a basement, rehearsal room, or hear them live, or go out in the studio, everything sounds much more like that vinyl than it does on digital.
You think that's the sort of perfection of digital, just taking away some of the mystery, some of what your brain puts in there, some of the emotion?
I think digital is actually changing the relationship between the instruments and the effects that are used to make the instruments work amongst each other. And I think when digital changes that, you don't have what you created in the control room anymore. You have something that's almost, well, it's different. And so when you know that's going to happen, and if you believe that's going to happen, you're going to do things when you're mixing in the box to try to minimize that or prevent it from happening. If you don't believe that happens, then it's going to happen 100%, and you're going to come out with something that I think is a little cold sounding. I think digital is a great medium. I think it's convenient. I think it helps us do a lot of things that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. But I think it's overused in terms of, I think it seems to be overused because the feel is going away. I think instruments are all fighting for the same plane. They have no depth. There isn't, like on vinyl, and I'm not being a purist here. I'm simply saying what I'm hearing. Okay, how's this? Get on the turntable and play it in a room, and pick a section and turn it up till it hits 0. Then play a CD of the same song in the same passage and let it hit 0. The vinyl record is going to fill up the room with sound, and the CD isn't at the same level. So you tell me what that is. No one really knows. Everyone says, oh, it's the ones and zeros. No, it's between the ones and zeros. I'm not sure anybody really knows, but I know for sure that it's happening.
I certainly am no expert. Here's one from Glenn. It says, what strategies, techniques do you employ when the mix starts to go in circles, and the more you tweak, the worse it gets? How do you reset and reestablish a baseline to rebuild the mix?
For me, that's easy. I stand up and I look at the board, unless you're using a computer. Unless you're using a DAW, and it's harder. I stand up and I look at the board, or I try to take and look at the DAW and say, where am I EQing everything? Holy cow, it's all in the same place. Why am I doing that? Or if I look at it and it looks reasonably correct, I'll pull all the faders down, scare the hell out of the producer and the band, go outside and literally jog around 3 or 4 times in my head, literally. Sometimes you have to just get out of your environment And there's no shame in doing this. There's no shame in clearing your head and keeping your perspective. Nobody ever got laughed at for keeping their perspective. So everyone has to do this in the way they would do it. I call it the through the door test. Go outside in the hallway, play the music wherever you are, shut the door and go out in the hallway and listen. What you're going to hear is this without all the flash. And this is either going to have feel and drive and excitement, or it's not. And if it doesn't, you got to figure out how to put it back in. And if that doesn't work, what I've done is look at the producer. Do you mind if we change songs? Yeah, but we've been working on it for 2 days. I know, but we're not going to get it right now. Let's get some other songs under our belt. Let's choose something that's not a single so that we can, there's no pressure on us. And let's choose a B song and make that work and make it exciting. And then let's come back to this song near the end of the album. So when people say, yeah, but all my songs are really good, listen, the Beatles only had 2 or 3 A songs on an album. If it was 12 songs, that means 9 of them were B songs. They might have been amazing B songs, but never to be an A song. So you can find a B song that you have and just to yourself, it's not a single, and spend time on that and make it the best it can be. And that's what I would do.
So clearing your head, basically.
Yes, everyone has their tricks about clearing their heads.
Yeah, wonderful. Fantastic. Just scrolling through here for some popular ones. All right. Well,
all you guys read too much. You know what you read in magazines can be very informative, but it's the ideal, and you have to put it all aside after you've read it and say, all right, what are my feelings about this, regardless of what I've read. It's just to give you all an overview. And whenever I see somebody do an interview about how they got a vocal sound, how they got this sound, how they got that sound, I've only seen one guy ever tell the truth. Nobody gives their secrets away. All the engineers.
I try to. I put a video up of every single thing I do on a vocal.
But see, that's awesome. There are a few people that do it, but most are when they say they put 4 limiters in a line and they did this, that, and the other thing. I mean, I work with those guys. I know a lot of them. I know a lot of what they do to get to where they want to go. A lot of them don't reveal it. They just make up something. Interesting.
Well, they talk about the product they're endorsing. Yeah, I use that. And everybody's like, well, wait, they didn't make that product in the year that you made the album, but you said you used it.
So be careful of those descriptions.
I read one of those once, and the guy was talking about using, I'm not even going to say who it was, but he was talking about a mic that came out in the 80s, and he was talking about a 70s recording.
Oh, by the way, I'm telling you all the truth about what I do, just so you know.
I believe you. All right. Well, here's one that's very popular from Jared. It says, do you have a studio horror story that you're willing to share? 5 people like that question. Let's come up there.
Okay. Let's see.
I want to hear this one. I'm 6. Colin
Well, I'm
7.
not sure I have one that I can talk about. There's plenty I can't talk about.
Well, can you talk about one without mentioning who the artist was? Just say the singer. Don't even go into gender.
Yes. Well, yes.
I'm trying here, guys.
I got a phone call.
Okay, this is good.
That says, "Can I cough first, and you'll edit this out?"
Yeah, no, it's live. You can cough. It's
Pardon me. Oh, hold on 1 second.
This is a good start. I got a phone call.
I got a phone call. Listen, the federal marshals are going to be there either today or tomorrow. The artist contract is being bought by another label, and the artist doesn't feel that it's transferable, even though it says it is. So they're going to come in and take the tapes.
Wow.
I can't tell you what we did after that, but well, maybe I can, because you don't know who the artist is. So what we did was, no, I'm not going to say.
The federal marshals are coming to
take the tapes.
Wow.
Yeah, And
That's old school horror stories. If ever.
so you know, we're in the middle of an album, and this is a major artist, and they're having a contract dispute, and the record company is not going to have it. They are not going to play dispute. They're saying it's in the contract. Here it is. Read the contract. You signed it. You're a big boy. So luckily it worked out.
Big boy or girl.
Big boy or girl. Yes. You're an adult. Thank you.
Not giving away gender.
Yeah. And so luckily it all worked out. Someone intervened and came up with an idea how to solve the issue. I think we stopped working for a couple of weeks. We all disappeared for a few weeks, and then we rejoined and finished.
I went to a studio that we both know of. I'm not going to say what studio it was. And we went out to have lunch, and we came back, and the locks had been changed on the studio.
Oh my God.
Because the guy that was running, I'm not going to say what it was for some reason, but the guy that was running the studio was renting it from somebody else, and he hadn't paid the bill. And this was a big album, so the owner of the building knew that he'd got a check in, but he hadn't paid him.
Right.
So he changed the locks on us.
Mm.
Anyway,
Nice.
yeah. Okay, well, there's a popular
Thanks for
one.
the surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Given the age of the internet we currently live in, is it still necessary to move to a known music city as LA, Nashville in order to be successful? Well, that's a huge question. Do you think you need to move to LA if you're going to be in the record business? Or New York? Or Nashville, of course.
The reason I'm hesitating is because I have a few answers to that question.
Please.
If you're writing, if you're in your bedroom and you've never been in a van eating ramen noodles and you just wrote Layla, you don't have to be anywhere except in that bedroom where you just wrote Layla. And or Imagine, or you know, and you can get somebody to represent you. And if you want to be a songwriter, you can get that song to someone else. If you want to be a performer, there's always somebody who will take amazing stuff and can usually get you a deal of some sort. Because when it's undeniable, it's just undeniable. However, not everyone is writing at that level. You might grow to that. So I think that you need to be in the city where you feel you can get someone to help you. No one does this alone. Everyone does it in teams. You need someone to champion you. I would suggest that, even though you didn't ask this, everyone thinks they need a manager. A lot of times there's really nothing to manage. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, the person isn't far enough along. But what you do need is a good music business attorney to keep you out of trouble, so you don't sign something that prevents you from, when you are about to have success in terms of signing with someone who can help you. You don't want to be in a contract that's going to clash with that contract, and you need someone in your life to keep you out of trouble. And anyone who says to you, "Oh no, you don't have to show that to anybody," I would turn around and walk the other way.
Yeah,
really fast. And people will say, "Oh, but I can't afford a music business attorney." You can't afford not to have one. And the guys will work with you, and they know you're up and coming, and they like you, and you have to make your way.
Yeah, I agree
in
with
that way.
Yeah, I think so many horror stories of great artists that we both have known and worked with that did really terrible deals early in their career.
I know. I can't name the artist, but through my personal friend, her father brought this young girl to my friend and said, because he was a manager, a local guy who was very talented, but he wasn't in New York or LA, just really good at what he does and getting bands work. And he said, "I'd like you to meet my daughter," Tina at the time. And he didn't care for her look or the way she sang, but he recommended that they meet with a writer. And then her and her father moved to Nashville, because you know everybody thinks I'm going to go to Nashville and make music. And the problem for people who are not from the South, people in Nashville have been inundated with people not from Nashville, trying to tell them how to make records. It doesn't go over well. I think you have to meet people there. I think you have to take your time. It takes a couple of years in Nashville, I think, to get accepted. And I understand the whole process. I have a lot of respect for the music that's done in Nashville that's successful and people trying to be successful. In LA or New York, you have to find somebody who will champion you. And you're not going to do it by sitting on the couch watching TV. You have to get out, go to a club, go to here, go to there, meet people. Very difficult. Not easy, but can be done. It's done all the time. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And I agree with you entirely. Just to sort of underscore that, I think if you are doing country, it's pretty difficult to not do country in Nashville. Yeah.
Yes, because they're not going to take somebody from New Jersey and accept them as a country singer in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
However, this girl and her father went to Nashville. Some things started to click for her. It took a while, and suddenly she became a really huge artist. And it's a great success story.
And I know who it is. We'll talk about it off camera in a minute.
Yes, we will.
And so I think you may have covered it, but just to top and tail it, the next most popular question is, what is the one piece of advice you would give absolute beginners and amateurs in progressing in our careers?
Don't say no to anything. Try to take every legitimate opportunity and make the best out of it. And don't get caught up in saying, is it paying enough? It's free. I don't know if I want to forget all that. Get your foot in the door. People who will help you want to meet other people like themselves. Everyone that I've met who is successful, without exception, gravitate towards people that remind them of themselves. Hard worker, working at it 24/7, sincere, honest. And I think that when those people meet, the person who's successful recognizes who the other person is, up and coming, and they'll take you under their wing and they'll help you. Even if it's only a short distance till the next person can help you and help you help yourself. I
agree entirely. That's a wonderful statement. When recording instruments, what is your method for adding room mics? Is this something you always capture? Would you tend to blend the close mics with room mics before bussing down to one track, or do you give them their own tracks in mixing?
What was the first line there?
When recording instruments, what is your method for adding room mics?
Oh,
I think they're saying, do you, especially when you were in 24 track, before, a million tracks like we have now, would you bust down?
Oh, I see. I would start out by trying to have two room mics on their own tracks.
Right.
And if I couldn't, then I would combine the two room mics on the one track and then split it later and put a slight delay between the two, maybe reverb or actual delay on one of them to make it feel like it's a different mic or a different track.
I see.
And simulate, maybe limit one more than the other so that you can't tell that they're the same signal. Sometimes putting a gate on it and just not gating in the way you all gate, but gate very subtly. Just follow the decay of the sound just down a little bit, and it will change the waveform, and therefore it'll sound different to you, and it will work. As far as room mics, I try not to combine them with anything unless I really have to. And choosing a room mic, you really have to choose a room mic that complements the sound of the room. If the room is bright or the leakage, see, the room mic is really picking up your drums at a distance, and that's going to give you your size. If you use a mic that's as bright as some of the rooms are that people record in, it's going to go off the charts in terms of brightness and annoyance. You really need a mic that is the opposite of how the room sounds. If the room is hot sounding, you need a very warm mic, a mic that when you talk into it, your voice sounds very warm and full. If the room is dead, you would use a mic that's more exciting, naturally exciting sounding or brighter or more present. But if you tried to use that mic in a hot room, it's not going to work. You have to mix and match. And the idea about getting that room sound is to make the room sound as even as you can from floor to ceiling in terms of a wall of sound. Even if you have to EQ it, manipulate it, fool the phase, and it will do a lot for you later. And then you can fool with it in the mix. You know?
There was a huge tip in what you just said there. You said when you plug it in, if it sounds warm on your voice.
Yes.
So you can audition mics quickly by
Yes.
just going, oh, that's too bright, that's warm. That's.
You can also do that in a room.
Yeah.
In other words, if you walk into a room and you want to know what your stuff is going to sound like, and you talk in that room, just talk out loud. It might seem foolish at first, but forget that stuff. It's one of your tools. Talk in the room the way I'm talking now. If your voice doesn't sound like a voice, if it sounds like this or other odd things going on, that's just how your drums and guitars are going to sound. So you have to change something in that room if that's where you're going to record, so that your voice sounds like your voice. And then it's as close to a guarantee as you're ever going to get that the instruments you're recording are going to sound like those instruments when you start. You know, crap in, crap out. There's not a lot you can do if it's awful, you know.
Right. Great tip. Here's the next most popular. Hey, Shelly Warren, as a fly on the wall, what is the most memorable experience in the studio? Oh, I like that. Could you share a story that you'd cite as an epic moment of creativity?
Yes. It happens every once in a while where a guy like myself can make a difference. Usually it's the producer and the group and the label who have worked out some of these songs and worked on the songwriting, brought in other people to help it be the best it can be. And once in a while, someone like myself who's mixing or recording can make a difference, you know. I'm trying to think. Okay, so there's a group called the Raspberries. That is a group that they were pretty popular in the. Actually, Eric Carmen was the lead singer, who went on to have his own hits, and they did a song called "Go All the Way," and for some reason, it didn't come out well, and the producer was relying on this song to be the single off the album, and he looked at me and he said, I don't know what I'm going to do now. This song can't be on the album. It's not played well. We've tried it over and over. It's a difficult song to play and to get it right. And we had this, we had just gotten this limiter in that was a Roger Meyer limiter.
Wow.
And it was a prototype. And it was so violent sounding that we called it Oscar Mayer, because you put music in one side and get hot dogs out the other. That's how different it would make the music. And the release time was on clicks, and it just happened that one of those clicks. I said to the producer, "Let me try something here. I got this crazy piece of equipment," and we took our finished mix that had taken much longer to mix than I had ever taken to mix a song. And we just tried to make the song work, and it was just okay. We put that finished mix into the limiter, and I adjusted the input level, and this thing starts to pump in the tempo of the song. The release, the one setting happened to be the tempo of the song, and it started to pump. And it got exciting, and the producer turned to me and said, I don't understand. It went from not being on the album to being on the album, and could be a top 5 song. I don't understand how it's possible. And what it did was, call up the song. Just get the best version you can find online, because some of them copied. Not only did
What's the name of the song again for watching?
Go All the Way.
Go All the Way.
Yes. So that song became a really big hit and really popular. And guys at radio used to tell me, this thing is so loud, the only thing I can play after it is the news or a commercial. Because the meters was so much limiting, but you couldn't hear it. It just had that movement. It wasn't squashed flat. The meters would go up, the needles would go up and just sort of wiggle at 0. And it was really great sounding. So then what happened was, we go on with the rest of the album. And I came back and listened to the song, and I said, wow, it really transformed this. And I said to the owner of the studio, Roy Sakala, I said, Roy, where's that limiter? He said, that thing can't be used for anything. I sent it back to Roger. I said, give me his number. Roger, that limiter that Roy sent back, where is it? He said, it's all over my bench in pieces.
Oh.
I said, I said, oh my God, don't tell me that. You joking? No. He said, Roy hated it. He couldn't use it for anything. I said, can't you put it back the way it was? He says, that prototype, that was just me fooling around. And I don't know where I was.
Oh.
That was it. That was it. It was gone.
I hate hearing that, but I love that story. It's fantastic. Oh, here's an interesting one. Do you have a piece of hardware that you would consider to be a guilty pleasure?
Oh boy. Pultex, Fairchild's, LA2As. Sorry, I don't just have one. One thinks I use really expensive mics, and generally I don't. They're reserved for certain applications. Those expensive mics are reserved for certain applications that are, to me, unique, and they work on those in those unique situations. Generally, I used inexpensive mics, got the instruments in the room to sound good, and then tried to capture it with the equipment that we had. And that equipment, Pultex, LA2As, Fairchild's, Neves, 1066s, 1073s. Those pieces of equipment really make a difference in the final thing. I don't think you can use one piece of equipment for everything, unless you varied that piece of equipment to have a different sound in some way. They all have very strong personalities. So I don't have, I'm sorry to say I don't have one. I would have to say, anything that sounds like a Fairchild, a Pultec, an LA2A. Anything that makes that sound, you can get almost anything out of. And then, of course, you have other companies who made limiters and compressors that do very different things. But to me, they can only be used occasionally and for certain specific things. What I'm describing comes out of the day of, okay, if I'm working in a studio for the first time, and I'm working with a producer for the first time, and I'm working with this group for the first time, and I've got all these new things, and I've never made a record with any of these people or in this room, I had better start with something familiar. So I always had a mic, sort of a mic list I would use, and I knew that those mics were always going to sound a certain way. Even though they didn't belong to me, they all had their personalities. And I knew that if it didn't sound right, that even though I didn't know the studio, I would make it sound familiar to me. And that helped me work in places where I had never worked before. Even though I ended up settling in certain studios for many years, I still kept that going, you know. I want to, no one has asked this yet, but I wanted to mention that in the day of 4-track and 8-track recording, engineers had to put reverb right on the snare drum, right on the set of drums, even if, the combination of things. Sometimes you'd put a bass and a piano on the same track on 4-track. It was called low and high. So when you got to the mix, you could get a little more bass, a little more piano by using a little bit of EQ because they were locked in. And so when we would take a set of drums that was on all on one track, and we would listen. Basically, how we listened in the studio where I learned was in mono. Believe it or not, we listened in mono on 3 speakers because that was what was correct sounding. In terms of 3 speakers, fixed the abnormalities of all the other 2 speakers or 3, and it made one correct sound. And we would always listen as a record, and we would, because you combining things, you have to get the sounds right. You can't get them wrong and combine them, think you can fix them later. So consequently, when music went to 8-track and you could put a bass drum on a separate track, which is always the hardest thing to maintain in your final mix, from the days of being all together, went on 8-track and you put the bass drum by itself, you still have all the drums together, and there'd be some reverb on the snare. So then when it went 16 track, I wanted to put reverb on a snare, and the producers were really scared of it because, and I'd remind them, look, we just recorded 8 track, which sounds very good, by the way, because of the track width. But we used to do it on drums. And he said, yeah, but I never liked having to do that. I want to do it later. So my point is, when you can take a little bit of reverb and put it on a snare, even now, and you get to the mix, and you put that snare with a little halo of reverb around it, which is going to get eaten up by the other instruments and lost, basically. But when you take that track that has that all sort of semi-finished, and you put that into your next effect that you're going to put it into, you get a much better result than putting a plain flat snare drum that you didn't want to fool with at all and saved it all till later. And one other thing I want to add about this that might help people out there who want to make better records is I don't believe in EQing later, or all of it later. I believe in doing a little twice. Because if you were to look at the curve of EQs, when you have to use them a lot, generally they're very pointed when you use them a lot, and they become annoying sounding, but you have to use it a lot if you didn't use it at all, because you're competing against other products that are out there, whether it's on at a party, whether it's on the radio, wherever it is, you're competing against people that EQ'd when they recorded. So if you're not sure, I suggest you EQ a little bit when you record, just to clean up the sound a little bit, help it a little bit until you find your footing. Don't do anything severe, but cleaning it up a little bit, maybe even using a little tiny bit of limiting, just make that needle wiggle just a little bit, not this. Just try to get your feet wet, and then when you get to the mix, do a little more, and you'll be quite surprised at the final product you end up with, how much better it is than if you save it all for later and you're using a lot of compression, which doesn't ever sound good except in certain cases, and it doesn't ever sound good again.
Right. I agree. That makes perfect sense to me. When I engineered with Dave Sardi, that was one of his things, was he would compress, but a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. So exactly what you're saying.
And if you're nervous about it, send it to 2 tracks. Send the instrument to 2 tracks, one unmolested and one with whatever you're going to do to it. Save it for later. Experiment.
Do you think that one genre proliferation in the mainstream charts is bad for the industry as a whole, and the change would maybe boost the industry? What are your thoughts on the future of the industry as we live in, as we work in as a business to make a living in? Well, that's a huge question, Joe. Basically, I think what he's trying to say is, like, at the moment, when you turn on the radio, pop radio in particular, when I was a kid, it was like there would be a band that had some synths in it, a band that had some pianos in it. There was a guitar rock band. You know, we talked about Romeo and Juliet was a top 10 single. It was a huge hit. But at the same time, new wave was just coming out. So there was like, no, synth stuff. And, you know, now when you turn on pop radio, it's pretty much the same 2 or 3 producers and songwriters with it's the same guys making the same records. Your feeling on that, and also what's your thoughts on the future of the industry?
Well, the industry is going to take until it takes it, because of all the things that have happened that hurt the industry financially and stuff. So no one really knows what you can see where it's going, but you don't know if that's where it's going to actually end up. So I can't predict that, except to say the industry will survive because people love and need music. Their lives, most people's music. You don't have to be in this business to appreciate music or to listen all the time to your favorite stuff. So the industry is going to be around forever. It's unknown what form it's going to take so that artists can afford to keep making records and songs and stuff. And there was one other part to that question.
What was your thoughts on the future in the music to make a living? I think it's just like for us, you know, as recordists,
Yes.
producers, engineers, mixers, even songwriters, what are your thoughts as to the future?
Well,
I suppose being able to make a living at it.
well, I think something great is always accepted and wanted and wished for, and I think that always takes over. I think as far as what you're hearing genre spin on the radio, if you try to copy that now in 6 months, what you're hearing on the radio or wherever you listen, that's going to be gone thing, because the cause it to go on to the next cool thing are not thinking, I got to copy what's out there now. They're doing it from here. They're doing it from their innermost feelings. And people who have changed music dramatically over the years, it was because a song done in a certain style with a certain sound came out, and all of a sudden it changed everything, even the level of songwriting. I've seen this happen, and it will continue to happen. Something great can be in any genre and be accepted and be fun to listen to, be accepted by the public.
Automating a mix, what are you listening for or reacting to? What is your philosophy on automate? So basically volume oscillation.
It's easy to tell you what I don't do.
What do you do?
I don't move the faders to make it perfect. I don't out every single thing that's bothering me or every single thing. Controlling that fader and it's automated. Sometimes you just got to let it fly. Leave it alone. Move it up louder, move it down quieter and in the appropriate places. But this constant adjusting along the way to make a perfect record, oh my God, put me to sleep. I can't do it.
So what you're saying is if a guitar player is like going quiet on a moment or a singer is coming down for a moment, that's what it should do rather than always focusing it.
Yeah, and let another instrument take over for a moment, just even if it's even for a fraction of a second, to have that color. I mean, look, if you go to a club or a stadium and you listen to the ride out of some of these songs, where the band may have known long and they're looking at each other and they're playing without even knowing what's going to happen next. That's what the whole song should be like. I don't know if I'm making it, I don't know how clear I'm being to people out there, but.
Well, that's the excitement. That's the kind of flying by the seat of your pants part of it.
Yes, and sure, the verse has to be, and for music to work to the listener, there has to be a substantial difference between the verse and the chorus. It can't just be the verse sounds like the chorus. There has to be a meaningful difference in melody, in volume, in intensity, and it's usually joined together by a little bit of pre-chorus. Not that it has to be, but I mean, I've seen people take exciting records and make them so perfect that they just laid there, but they didn't notice that the feel went away.
Right.
Because you're only going to get 2 listens out of it from anyone else without the feel.
I understand entirely. I've talked about this before. So, like I've done a lot of records for piano bands. So the piano player starts off playing the piano. Now, when the chorus comes in, they turn more into a rock band. So I don't push the piano up through. It's like, no, the piano is now supporting the guitars. But what you're talking about, and I totally understand, is like, let's just say you keep that piano like the loudest thing in the whole mix. Well, suddenly there's no excitement in the chorus when the guitar came in.
Yeah.
It's just deciding what the role of each instrument is.
Look. Here's the thing. In England, when the Beatles made records, they tried some of those songs 3 and 4 times. And in America, if you do a song a second time, you damage goods. Why'd you redo the song? Why did you I mean, go to the end of the stuff and you'll see it doesn't show you how they figured out the next incarnation, but you do hear the incarnation and you'll say, wow, that song sounds familiar, but that's not the version on the album. That's because they figured out it wasn't working. They went in and recut it and then recut it again until they got what they wanted. But in America, if you do that, it's frowned upon. You know what? I think you just need to serve the song. And my suggestion to people about automation, if you're fixated on making this perfect record, great, make it. Now you got that saved. It's in the can. All right, you're not going to lose it. Now put your hands on the faders, even though they're automated. Put your hands on the faders and just start moving the stuff around, and then listen to it back and see if you got something that's more exciting. And if you do, build on that. If you don't, then go with this perfect mix you have.
Proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Yes.
What is interesting is mono when I'm mixing, regardless of phase issues. Do you still go back and check in mono for phase and stuff?
Absolutely.
Great.
There's another reason I use mono. It makes a better stereo mix. You listen in mono. Would you like to know why?
Yeah, please.
Oh, I can't tell you because you already know, I think.
Oh no, I don't. I'm learning. I'm learning so much here.
That's very nice of you to say that.
Trust me, I'm learning. Why do you think I do this? I do this so I can learn.
All right, so you put your speakers in mono, right? Just if you're lucky and you have a button where you can put them in mono, so the same thing is coming out of both. If you mix that way, you can come out with a stronger stereo mix. So let me back up a little bit. Let's say you're mixing in stereo and you're listening to your stereo mix. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but I certainly have. I go out to the car or another room and I listen to what I got. And I say, that guitar could be louder, but by a meaningful amount. But it sounded loud enough in the control room. Back in after hearing it outside the control room. And I realized the guitar sounds quiet to me for the first time on the speakers I'm mixing on.
Well,
okay. All of a sudden, it gave me brought it to my attention. Because you can sit for hours and get used to something that's wrong. It's something that happens to everyone. If you sit there over and over and over for many hours, you can get used to something that's wrong and not realize it until you realize it. So if you were to put the speakers in mono at that moment, you'd understand what I'm saying, because that guitar is most likely going to disappear. So when you turn that guitar up, so remember in mono, everything's laying on top of each other and everything has to sound really good for it to work in the final, because you won't hear the instruments unless you get the EQ and limiting and placement and reverb and all that stuff correct in mono, because they're all fighting for the same spot no matter what speaker you're on. Well, when you get it to sound right in mono, and then you click your speakers to, remember, you're mixing in stereo all the time, but you're listening in mono. So when you click your button to go to stereo, you're going to hear a stereo mix where stuff is turned up really full and very cool. And you get this wall of sound, if that's what's appropriate for your mix. Or if it's something more subtle, it'll be a very cool sounding section of the song. It's just a great tool, and I suggest that you try it, and if it doesn't work for you, try it again until you can get comfortable with it. Most of you out there, I think, are work by yourselves and are not used to working with other people, and I get that, but we're other people, and we're trying to throw you some information here that could help you expand your horizons.
You're doing a wonderful job of that. Here's somebody who says, "Hi, Shelly. I met you in A&M back in the 90s. My friend Mark McKenna told me a funny story about you working with U2. He said you worked on drum sounds for a week and concluded that 1064s sounded better than 1073s. Is that true?
1066s.
Oh, 1066s.
For me.
For you.
I like them I like 1066s on a bass drum because they're very solid. And actually, the only difference that's supposed to be between a 1066 and a 1073 is my understanding is that on the 1073, the high-end choice is 15K or 12K instead of 10 or 12K. Anyway, it's a step higher. Everything else supposedly was supposed to sound the same, but A 1073 is a little more open sounding to me than a 1066. 1066 is a little drier, but it sounds good and solid on a bass drum for me. And since I didn't have too many 1073s, I ended up using more of the 1066s on the drum set.
Well, that's very cool to know. Here's Rudra, who says, for a wide and big guitar sound, what are the tricks? He says he records a DI guitar as well as an amp signal. Would you enrich and isolate the two sounds, blah, 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 distinctly to make a bigger sound without affecting the center much? Love from India. Have you ever done that? Do you combine DIs with amp sounds and do anything?
Yes, I don't like DIs by themselves.
Right.
They're too dry, and they, for me, the way I mix, they're too dry. They take up too much space. They just eat up everything. I think when you combine of course you got to make sure they're in phase. When you combine some amp with it, to me, in the right proportion, you get the best of all the worlds. You get that closeness, but you also get that bigger sound.
Would you, Joe says, thanks for the answer, by the way. Do you, would you keep them panned on top of each other, the DI and the amp?
Generally, yes, but many times I've used it where I've opened them up just a little bit to make the sound a little wider. Because sometimes on top of each other, they're just in this one little place in your placement in the song. Pardon me, but being able to open them just slightly gives you a bigger sound for that instrument, but yet you're not giving away that something is direct.
Right. It's fantastic.
And also the direct can be reamped through a little box out into the room. If the only thing you have is a direct, you can reamp it out into your room and pick it up again with a mic, and you'll get something very similar. You know, what people aren't asking about, which is interesting to me, is
they may have. We've got so many hundreds of questions. So
okay,
no, Karen.
Is how, if you're recording at home, how do you get the sounds that we get in the studio? Well, two things. You can turn any room in your house, preferably the bathroom because it's tile, into a live chamber. So get a stereo if you don't have a stereo, get one from a pawn shop for $20 and with a receiver and a couple of speakers, and send one of your sends from your TAW down the floor, under the door, into the bathroom, into the receiver, and crank up the speaker in there and pick it up with a mic as far away as you can get that mic. Fool around with the direction of the mic, whether it faces away or towards the speaker, and you can use that sound to enhance your sounds. And you can change the distance of the speaker to the microphone, or even a stairwell going into the basement. You have the microphones in the basement. You can have the speakers shooting down the stairway. There's so many tricks you can use to enhance your stuff, other than plugins, other than using the plugins that are available. And the other thing is,
and they'll be individual because they'll just be only you can get that sound.
That's right. That's right. And you can tune it and you can learn to work with it. And the other thing is, I don't believe in putting plugins directly on the sound. Sorry, a limiter, yes. An equalizer, yes. But reverb units, no. Put them on a send, because they almost always ruin the quality of the sound, even though they have a dry and wet thing on it. So, oh, and one other thing. Modern equipment is very affordable and appears to be very clear sounding, but it's at the expense of the fullness. 400 cycles, even if it's off a half a dB, it's going to be thin sounding. Modern equipment does not have transformers in it, which I believe you need to get that thickness, that fullness of whatever you're working on. Aside from that, if you don't have transformers, which is okay, find a 15 dB pad, inline pad. They look like a cigar. Shure makes them. They make variable ones and fixed ones. Other companies make them. Buy some inline pads and knock the level down of loud things like snare drums, bass drums, before they ever enter your console. Because the way consoles are constructed, or DAWs are constructed now, even though you have a gain for your preamp, that gain is in the middle of the electronics. It's already breaking up before it gets there at high level. You want to knock it down before it gets this. Now, what you're going to hear is that a lot of times it appears to lose the high end, and you're going to say, oh, this is dull. No, no, no. The brightness you were hearing was distortion. You don't want that because it has no power. So it's going to dull it down almost always, but then you have the core sound. You have what's really there. Your preamp should run between 10 and 2. That's it. If it's way down, it's too much level coming in. If it's way up, it's not enough level coming in. So you have to learn to use your gain structure correctly and put a pad on this stuff, and you will see instruments grow to twice the size of what you're normally listening to. A big solid snare drum, big solid bass drum, powerful, because it's not folding up in the electronics before your pad. And most of the time, if you do have a pad, it's a 20 dB, too much. 20 dB phono proof. Don't use it. Try to use a 15 or a 10 if you can find a 10. 10 is sometimes not enough for certain loud things. Like if your microphone doesn't have a pad on it available to switch on, or if it's a 20 on the microphone and you take my advice and don't use it, that level coming down the line into your preamp, try to knock it back by with a 15 dB pad if someone's singing loud. Then you have the issue of if they're singing really quiet on a part of the song and you can't get enough level and you're bringing up noise, you'll figure out how to deal with it.
That's a great tip. I've never thought about that. It's fantastic.
Makes a huge difference in the final product. You can never do what guys like Warren and myself do and other successful
I love the
people.
fact he's including me in this as though I'm even worthy of like holding your suitcase. But I appreciate it.
But people fool themselves with the volume knob. Oh, I'll turn it up. Oh, that's bigger and better.
People are saying, can we get Shelly back for part 2 of this interview? I would hope so.
It's up to Warren.
Oh, no. Oh, great. I love that. So, yes. Let's do 2 more questions in the next 4 minutes. See if we can find a couple. Lots of people saying thank you, which is wonderful. Oh, here's David. David Mood. What's David's question? Shelly, could you share any tips for dealing with difficult artists? Oh, that was a big one. We haven't talked about the artists.
Now, this is a really great question. I basically built a career on working with artists that other people thought were difficult. I even would get phone calls. Shelly, I know you're going to take this project over, but wait till you see what you're going to get. This artist is going to torture you. And you want to know something? It never happened. It never, I see my job as trying to get what's in the artist's head to come out of the speaker. And sometimes they ask for things where I say to myself, if I give them that, I think it's going to sound goofy. So I got to have something else in mind. Let me give them this. Maybe they'll recognize it isn't going to sound right. So I do it and they go, yeah, I thought that was going to work, but it isn't. So I'd say, all right, well, what about this? Let's try this idea. Because you have to say to yourself, what's making them ask that question in the first place? Why aren't they happy with what they're hearing? They don't just say it to waste time or to fool around with equalizers. It's not the AES show in your control room. So why are they asking? Be Columbo. Say to yourself, in case you don't know, Columbo's a detective. So be Columbo and say, why is my artist asking for this, even though it's not bothering me? And I think you're going to find that when you understand what they want to hear, they may know their music better than you. And the worst thing you can do is make it an engineer or a producer's record. If you're asking a question from a producer,
the worst thing you can do is make it an engineer or a producer's record. That's a great idea.
Yes, you have to include the artist.
Yeah.
And if the artist doesn't have the ability to communicate their ideas, you have to figure out what you think is going to work for the artist and play them a few different things. Sometimes you can give the artist what they want and you think to yourself, to me, it's falling short. But if I tell them this, they're going to get insecure and think that what they picked is no good, because they're coming to me because I'm held out to be an expert, so to speak. So you kind of have to finesse it and say, come up with something that sounds good to the artist that they're looking for, and then say, hey, while I was fooling around with this and thinking about what you were saying, I got an idea. Do you mind if we try it? And if we don't try it, this is great, and let's go with this. But if I can come up with something that might add something to it, let's just try this out. Oh yeah, sure, no problem. And if it doesn't work, I look at the artist and say, well, it's not as good as what we got. And that also helps you realize that maybe what you did for the artist is better than you think. This is about pleasing the artist, but not to the point of sending it in a direction that no one's going to ever want to listen to. And here's another thing. I've been in the control room a million times when this has happened a million times to me, in front of me in the control room. The artist says to the producer, I don't like the song like this. I don't hear it being cut like this. And the producer says, but I hear it like this. Now, if that's allowed to go to the next sentence, it's 2 hours of that, sucking the life out of the room. You're not going to get anything done that day. Huge, incredible argument. So after a couple of times of seeing this as I was growing up in the business, I came up with a solution that works for my sessions. And that is, the artist who said that has a direction in mind. So I'd say, guys, why don't we do this? It's only going to take 3.5 minutes. Let's have the artist go out and cut their version. The producer has his version, and let's play them both back. And what happens is the song speaks to you, and it's obvious. No matter what anyone in that control room wants, the right version of that song is going to speak to you and say, it's obvious. And someone in that control room is going to say, wow, this idea really sucks. Let's go with this one. This is a much better idea. And the egos go out the window, and it all works out. There's only been one time when I saw both versions really work, and they ended up completing both versions and playing it for the record label. But that's highly unusual.
Can you tell us what that was?
No, I don't. No, I'm not going to talk about it. But generally speaking,
yep.
That solves that big issue, because the artists tend to hold their songs really close to the vest, and the producers are trying to make it reach a lot of people, not just the artist's friends. So in taking that song and trying to get it to be to reach a lot of people, because for all the right reasons, maybe it starts getting away from what the artist felt the song should be, and it's always difficult, but it's a business of comparisons. Keep trying a version until until you hear something like, oh, you realize your idea is just not going to work, and give it up. And I've only in all the times in all the sessions I've done, and all the times I've been in the studio, there was only one artist that said, this song came out exactly like I envisioned it. Once out of thousands and thousands
Who
of
was
songs.
that?
I don't remember. I don't, but I remember it happening, and it just speaks for what goes on in the heat of the moment in creating music.
Let's do the one last question, because even though we've gone a little bit over, I promised we'd do one more.
Okay.
Let's have a look. There's a couple here.
And don't forget to master your stuff.
When recording instruments, what is your method for adding room mics? Is it something you always capture? Would you tend to blend the close mic with room mics before bussing down to one track? Oh, we did that one already. Sorry, Eric. I already answered that. I thought I'd gone past that one. One more. We got so many here. I feel bad just choosing one, but we have to. Lots of thank yous, Shelly. It's just completely off the cuff from Dylan Hughes, just because it's an answer to a question. What is the quickest mix you've ever done that he said went top 5 or above in the chart? So basically what he's saying is, What was the song that was the easiest and quickest to mix that was really successful for you?
None of them.
Oh.
None.
None.
There was one song where we used the rough mix.
What was that?
Santa Baby, Madonna's Santa Baby. We recorded for the very special Christmas album.
Mhm.
We recorded the orchestra at Capitol Studios, and she came in. We were at another studio, and she came in to do her vocal. And the rough mix for her vocal was what we ended up using as the final mix. You know, we even talked about, all right, let's mix the song. I'm not sure we have to. Listen to this. It all fits. It works. A couple of touches, and it worked. And I don't know if you could do that with rock and roll, because it needs rock and roll music or electronic music. I think it all needs some help, you know, to make it compete and all that sort of stuff. But this beautiful orchestral stuff, and Madonna's voice and all. But aside from that, that was a pretty unusual and unique record. But aside from that, everything it's all difficult to mix if you want to cross that line from good to great. Look, people get confused. Lousy is I'm gonna do this in the camera. Lousy is here. Great is over here. But good is right beside great. And people think that good is enough, because they don't recognize that it's not great. You got to cross that line, which is very hard to do, and you got to know that this is where you're going. And when you get to that place and you pass good and it becomes great, that's when you have something special from beginning to end.
Wonderful. That's a great way to finish. Thanks, Joe. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, for me too.
Really good, and I definitely want to do another one.
Well, I'd love to. And if I don't say use ProMaster to master your stuff, I'm going to get my ass kicked.
Thank you ever so much for watching. Please subscribe, go to Produce Like a Pro, sign up for the email list, and you will know about the next one. Thank you ever so much. I know we did a lot of questions. There's so many here. I wish we could do them all.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to write in. It's really great.
Yeah, that's really important. You guys had some incredible, guys and girls had some incredible questions here. And you asked a lot of the ones that I wanted to ask. So thanks for watching.
Great.
We'll see you again soon.